Hi, Gary, and hi, Liz, by the way, and Graham and Jen. Sorry, I didn't get to say hi.
All right, we'll wait 1 minute till it's 10:01. All right, so Fritz is not here, so I think we will, if he does not appear, we will try and do minutes from the recording. And so I will call the meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to order. This is August 11th. We have a quorum on the screen. So this meeting is being recorded by the town of Nantucket and will be broadcast on the town's government TV YouTube channel after the meeting has concluded. If there is anyone here who's planning to make an audio or video recording or to transmit the meeting, please notify the chair before doing so. The materials for the meeting were posted with the agenda on the town's website. As a preliminary matter, this is Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. And I now have an alphabetical list to go down. So Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Graham Durovich.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
And for staff, we have Vince Murphy.
Here.
And I see one guest on the screen, Liz Trios. We may have others joining us. We do have a speaker anticipated at 11 a.m., an hour from now. He is not on the screen at the moment, so we will introduce him when he arrives. Okay, this open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will allow public comment if time permits. We have a heavy agenda, but we'll do our best. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and take care not to share the screen on your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Okay. We are now turning to the agenda. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Alrighty.
Mary?
Yep. Did I miss anything?
Nope.
Okay.
Had an email from Fritz. He couldn't find the link. I've sent it to him, so fingers crossed he'll join us shortly.
Join us. Yep. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from July 14. Since Fritz was the author, hopefully he will be able to join us, but does anybody have any comments or corrections on the minutes from July 14th? Ian, yes.
Yes, Fritz pulled a Stalin-esque move on me.
Vince tells me that he corrected that, and we have a corrected copy of the minutes with your name on them.
Okay.
I noticed that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other corrections or comments on the minutes? All right, I'm going to take a second and adjust my screen. There we go. So I can see everybody. So let's see. Well, let's go ahead and vote on approval of the minutes. All those in favor, I need a motion, I'm sorry. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, I'm going to take that as Sarah moved and Ian seconded. And so all those in favor, again, I have the alphabetical list. I'll go down. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace. Peter, you're on mute.
I'm staying.
Okay. Graham Durvich.
Aye.
Ian Golding.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
And Chair Mary Longacre votes aye. So we had, I think that's 6 in favor, 1 abstention, and 2 members are absent. Again, correct me if I did that math wrong, but I think that adds up to 9. We do not have the minutes of July 28th in the members' hands, although they have been received by Vince, so they will be included in our next meeting. Any questions on the minutes? I'm going to go forward to the meeting schedule through December of 2020. So we have had reserved for us the 2nd Tuesday of the month. So that is September 8th, October 13th, November 10th, December 8th. We had discussed going to 2 meetings per month, or going back to our schedule of 2 meetings per month starting in September. That would give us most likely September 22nd, October 27, November 24, and December 22. And when I look at that, would be the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of the month. When I look at that, I realize that both November and December, those are holiday weeks. And I don't know if people feel that having a meeting during those weeks would not be possible for them. There's certainly no reason why we couldn't do that. They're not right up tight to the holiday, but I wanted to review with the membership whether those dates were acceptable. Another option that I was considering is to leave those 2nd meetings of the month as floating times, anticipating that we would have scheduling meetings with the consultants working on the coastal resilience plan, and we might need some flexibility to meet with them. Vince, do you have a comment on when that might start? Or
no, I don't at the moment. Still in the process, and mostly I was waving to say hello to Fritz.
Oh, okay.
Thank
so
you.
Fritz, we approved the minutes after you reinstated Ian to the roster. So thank you for doing that. And we're discussing the meeting dates for the fall.
Great. Thank you.
So does anybody have any comments on a proposed twice-a-month meeting schedule for the fall, how we would schedule that?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ian.
I think it's a good idea to keep, reservation open, but I would have thought once a month at this juncture is all that is necessary, unless it turns out that we actually have something to discuss that has some bearing on our advisory role to the select board.
It's my anticipation that we will. Especially if we are reserving a significant amount of time to work with the consultants on the coastal resilience plan. We don't have to have a meeting if we don't need one. That's certainly a possibility. But I would rather schedule and cancel so that people have that time reserved on their calendar than try and assemble a group on short notice because we have a topic that needs to be addressed. But I'm happy to take the suggestions from the membership about what works for them.
Mary, I think it's a good
Yes,
idea to
Gary?
schedule it subject to cancel because you want to reserve a slot. You
Right.
don't want to give up that slot in case we really need it to meet and somebody else took it. And there are so many, there's limits to how many slots you may have. So
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Sarah?
Yeah, I just, I want to echo what Gary said. I know for you all, scheduling the meeting, that's important, but then, with working from home a lot, I have to say that there's so many Zoom meetings that are scheduled now that I think personally, having something scheduled that we potentially cancel is a lot easier than trying to find a time later.
Okay. I'm fine with that. What do we think about the second and fourth Tuesday of the month? Is there anybody that has a conflict with that or would prefer a different meeting day? Looks good to everybody. And then the meeting time, right now we're running 10 to 12. We had previously been running 10:30 to 12:30, and before that we were doing 12 to 2. Just checking in with people, what's the best timing for Tuesday meetings?
I like 10 to 12 is fine.
Okay. Everybody's fine with that. We don't need to change it. I just wanted to check in and make sure that people, particularly with the school year starting, although I don't know, what that schedule is going to look like yet. So, all right. So what we're anticipating then is meeting the second and fourth Tuesday of the month through, let's say through January, if everybody is okay with that, so that we don't have to reschedule or we wouldn't have to talk about the schedule in December when who knows what's going on, but with the holidays, who knows? Vince, question?
Yeah, just a simple one. And this is just going to begin in September, is it? This isn't going to be for August as well?
No. No, we're not anticipating another meeting in August at this point. Okay, can I get a motion for the second and fourth Tuesday from 10 to 12?
So moved.
Second.
Peter? Second from Fritz, thank you. All those in favor, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Graham Durovich,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. So that is unanimous with 8. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all. Next item on the agenda is a follow-up on the presentation of our recommendation to the select board. In case you didn't notice, it was adopted with very little discussion. And we also, we received, although I'm not sure that the select board received, a resolution from the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, which Gary, is it fair to say that you endorsed the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee recommendation? And if there's anything you want to tell us about that, please go ahead.
Oh, no, they all got it. I made sure they got it a few days before the meeting to make sure they knew that this is something they really had to address, since I was terribly distressed at the prior meeting when they tabled it. And I was delighted to see at this current meeting that it went through with hardly any discussion. So I'm going to take, or at least give credit to our committee for making it really simple for the select board to understand that this is something that they really needed to start doing, to start getting people sensitive to these issues that we are dealing with. And I was delighted it passed so quickly without any controversial discussion about it.
Well, thank you, Gary, for getting the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers to submit the letter. The support is much appreciated.
And Vince was helpful because Vince was at our meeting and he answered the questions that members of the committee had. So thank you, Vince, for that.
Okay, did anybody else have comments on the letter or questions for Gary representing the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers? Okay, seeing none. So the next question is, we've gotten the recommendation accepted. What's the next step? Open to suggestions. So okay, they got it, they like it. What do we do with it? Fritz?
Fritz, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the question is the question, what do we do with it or what do they do with it? I
Well, I'm not sure that anything will happen unless we provide a little guidance. I don't know. Vince, have you heard any feedback after the resolution was adopted?
No, I haven't,
Yeah.
but I've also not been through my emails entirely, I have to say. So it was adopted Thursday night and I've been on leave since, sorry, it was adopted Wednesday night, I've been on leave since Thursday morning.
Yeah.
But I did get one phone call from the Inquirer and Mirror from Brian Bouchard asking that very same question. And
Okay.
I effectively said, it's now a resource for the town to use. It's for the committee to start pushing on it effectively. And he did ask me one other question. Does this have any teeth behind it? And I said, well, this is the start of a process. This is an educational resource. Look at it as a kind of a lead in before there's a policy. It was the kind of way that I was trying to put it across to him. But the real use of this is for any town projects that come up in the next year or so. So I think the best thing we can do is kind of keep an ear to planning, keep an ear to anything else that's coming up. We can always provide this recommendation to developers, builders, and say, look, this is something that could be beneficial to you. But within town departments, now that it's been accepted by the select board, there is some level of requirement that town departments should use it.
So for those of you that, I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, sorry, just to your question, and sort of to Vince's point and question too, where that as an advisory board, we don't have the teeth, you know, we make the recommendations to the select board. And so they and the committees that they're in charge of can do with it what they see fit. And that's kind of where I understood kind of the end of our role. And if we remember too, in discussing doing this, it was sort of a stopgap measure, or at least in place of the coastal resiliency plan. So I feel like personally, I feel like our time would be really well used moving forward is working with the consultants and working on the plan. I think if we do too much without, if we since we aren't a regulatory board, if we do more, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's just my opinion on that.
Okay. Other thoughts, Fritz?
Yeah, just to go back to the extent it makes any difference, although certainly we found out in the case of a prior report, did they adopt it or did they accept it?
Well, that's, I'm not sure how the administration works in that regard. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this discussion about follow-up is, what happens next?
I would think.
Well, Peter, we'll go to you in a second. Go ahead, Fritz.
Yeah. From the point of view of somebody on the planning board, I guess my question would be, is somebody going to write a letter to the planning board or the planning department to say, the select board has adopted this recommendation, please take it into consideration in all future deliberations? And I guess the question is anybody going to do that?
Yeah. We'll come back to that, and then Peter.
I would just echo what Fritz said.
Yeah. And
maybe we need to make a recommendation to the select board that they do that they, if they haven't already, okay, you guys accepted this or adopted it or whatever, and you acknowledge the work that we did, but really this goes to the regulatory boards where the plans are going to come before them and they should be aware of it. So maybe we need to do that, give them a little nudge, a simple note from Vince, or we take a vote and say, okay, thanking them for doing what they did, but please pass this on to the HDC and the Concom and the planning board and whatever else, the historical commission.
Jen, and then Vince.
I was just going to say, does it make sense to have the members of this committee that are representatives on boards bring at their next committee meetings, report back that it was, accepted and kind of what our vision was for it. And then for the boards that we don't have representatives for, perhaps those are the boards that it makes sense to individually send a note to, as Peter and Fritz were suggesting.
I would, that's what I would hope to see. I mean, we have members on this committee that are here because they represent other groups. And I would, at a minimum, like to see those people take this recommendation to the groups themselves as part of their committee reporting. And, you know, and as you said, give a brief rundown on what our intent was and our philosophy behind it, and offer to answer questions, and then tell this committee if what happened. Was there were there a lot of questions? Were there concerns brought up? Was there general feeling of acceptance and compliance? You know, that's what I would hope to see. Vince, you had a comment, and I think Gary, you had too.
Yep, I just wanted to add to what Peter was saying, but expand on it, not just committees, but also the department heads, head of the DPW, likewise here in Natural Resources, and then it'll not only be implemented in Natural Resources, it could also then move its way to Concom, another committee. Where I kind of run into a bit of problems is, say something like the Maya Comet Water Company, a town entity yet somewhat standalone. That's kind of one of the trickier parts of it. But say once we get it to department heads, like sewer department, DPW, etc., that is when it's going to come into its own and start getting used. But we also have to distribute it to admin so that they'll use it too.
Gary, did you have something? Then we'll go
Yes,
to Graham.
I did. I did. My first comment is I don't think we should go back to the select board to ask them to do something else. I think they did what we wanted them to do, which is to bless our strong recommendation. And I agree with what Jennifer said, which is where there are members of these boards on our committee, we would certainly appreciate if they would say something to their own organizations. But there are a lot of other organizations on which who are not members of our board. And therefore, I think it's up to us whether the letter ought to come from you, Mary, or from Vince, or someone, or maybe a group of us, it depends, that ought to go to every one of these different regulatory organizations to remind them that the select board has now, by resolution, adopted this recommendation. And I like to use the words in our resolution, it says needs. I like the word needs. Couldn't get as tough as I would be, but it needs to be aware of and needs to use. And so what we're saying to all of these organizations, please be mindful of the fact that under this resolution, which has been blessed by the select board, all of your organizations need to use and be aware of these scenarios. And we want you to know that we, the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, and the coordinator himself, will be glad to help you in any way that you think necessary to implement these recommendations at your meetings.
I would say that Vince would be on the front lines of offering help. The committee wouldn't really personally be responsible for that, other than how they report to their various boards that they represent here. Graham, you had some comments.
No longer relevant. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So I'm perfectly willing to follow up with Libby as the chair of the committee, if people would like me to do that, and say, you know, okay, how does this get disseminated through the town departments? I'm also willing to make appearances at other committee groups that are not represented here. For instance, HDC, just pulling one out of a hat, to represent our recommendation if the committee would like me to do that. You know, no promises on how fast that's going to happen, but you know, just I'm offering myself up to do that as the chair. Anybody else who would like to do that, I think would be welcome to, but I wanted to make sure that as a group, we had a strategy that we all endorsed, and that we knew who was doing what, whether it's us or other people. Gary?
Mary, I think that I'm a little nervous about you going to these meetings, or any of us, going to these meetings, because suddenly to start asking you all of these technical questions, does that mean we are required to or not to? And I don't want to put you or anybody from our committee in that position. I think we're much better off with sending a written communication to them that says, look, the select board has blessed this, and you folks need to start understanding that in all of your decisions going forward, you need to take these matters into consideration. What it says, the select board is impressed and we'll be glad to help. If you actually go to the meeting, I can just see it happening at the HDC or somewhere where somebody says, well, Mary, suppose something was passed already, but they want coming for a modification. Does that mean we have to go back? You know, I don't want to put you or any of us in the position where we have to start doing all of the technical analysis. There are a lot of complexities to what we have recommended. We understood that when we started. That's why we wanted to make it good, not perfect. And we got it done, and we got the select board to approve it. And now we want to get people sensitized to the fact that they need to start thinking about these things in all of their deliberations going forward. And I think a written communication would prevent us getting into this technical complexity stuff. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Gary. I don't think that we should be answering technical or procedural questions because that's out of our scope. So I'm not too, I think I have that very clearly in mind, and that's why I'm willing to appear. I'm certainly not going to put myself on the spot to try and tell people what to do because that's not our role.
They're going to ask you.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Ian, you had a comment?
Well, yes. I mean, it reminds me of, you know, astrophysicists talking about the event horizon. In this particular case, you know, the black hole of town governance. And so I think it's important that we follow through, as Fritz and Peter have said. And so I think at the very least, you know, getting a commitment by Libby to start sending out this to different departments is important.
All right, so it sounds like first step is to ask Libby what the procedure is for this being disseminated across town administration. Are we comfortable, and I'm happy to do that, or because I would normally ask Vince, but Vince being out, I'm trying not to burden him. But you know,
sorry, Mary,
yeah.
beg your pardon. It is my job and I'm happy to do it.
Okay.
I do have some free time. So if something needs to get done, I'll do it.
Okay, so are we comfortable if Vince requests a procedural explanation from Libby? That's our first step. Gary?
If we conclude that what we're talking about is a good way to go, instead of just asking Libby out of the blue, why don't we say, this is what we were thinking, or we were recommending that we put together a piece of paper just to alert and send it out. Would you be supportive of that? In other words, don't just present it to her without any suggestion as to how we would like to go forward.
So that's an idea. Should we at the same time ask Libby if it's appropriate for us to get involved, or do we just want to take this one baby step at a time? Vince?
Just Gary has a brilliant point again, as all. Yeah. Procedurally, it's more or less, say for town departments, for Libby to tell departments what to do. So it's kind of a hierarchy of sorts. Select board tells Libby, Libby is, so they've effectively approved it. Now it's for Libby to send that. So what we could do is request from Libby to send it to the town departments. Likewise, I imagine it would be for Libby to send to boards as well through admin. I'm just trying to think it out because Gary had a very good point.
Fritz?
Vince, I know the town has regular department meetings. Seems to me that if Libby is chairing a meeting of town departments, that's something that she would bring up at a meeting. Is there another? When is the next meeting of the town departments?
Madam Chair, just procedurally, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So I'm not privy to those. I don't attend them. As I understand it, they're usually, I think, Tuesday mornings. I'm not 100% sure, to be very honest. Then I don't see any problem asking if she could do that. She sets the agendas for those. We can ask, can't direct.
So Libby did say that those meetings had resumed. They were on hiatus for a while because of COVID. But I did catch at one of the select board meetings that those meetings have resumed between the department heads. So just to help Vince out, it sounds like what we're saying is he will send Libby an email asking what the procedure is for implementing the recommendation, asking if she will be talking to town departments about it. And then, are we offering to get involved in any capacity? And if so, in what capacity? I'm sorry, Gary.
We should be recommending. I don't want to just go to Libby and just say, what do you think? I'd like to say, we thought about this, and our idea is that we'd love you to, we'll help you put something together to make sure that all of the organizations that should be following this resolution that the select board has adopted are now aware of it. So perhaps if we put something together, you could send it out. You could sign it, we could sign it, but certainly would better if you signed it, as Vince suggested, send it out to let people know that now that the select board has approved this, we expect them to take these matters into consideration in their future deliberations. Let it come from Libby. That would be great.
Peter and then Graham.
I can't help but think that that town administration is already getting some thing out there. We should just check in and see that they're doing it. I don't think we should be crafting a letter or anything. We should just be saying, now what are you guys going to do? Because we're an advisory board. We're advising you. We advise you to adopt this resolution. They adopted it. So it's not our job to go to all the regulatory boards and say, okay, now put this in place. It's the job of town administration. I think just a check in with Libby to see what's going on with this. Do you have something ready? Would you like us to write something? But are you going to get on it? I think we have things to do.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Graham.
Kind of following along what Peter was saying, but also we could offer Vince to go present at a cabinet meeting for all the town departments. It's not untraditional for somebody to go share it with the rest of the departments, what's happening in a certain action of government. So I think that would be pretty acceptable, and Libby would probably be receptive.
Okay, so I think that's a great way to introduce the topic is, for Vince, if you're willing to offer to Libby to present it at the cabinet meeting for the town department heads. I think that's probably the best way to approach it. I'm a little leery of leaving Libby out of the process because she is the hub around which all things rotate. And so I like the idea of, gently bringing up the topic. Best way to do that is to offer to do something. And I think that's a great offer, Vince, if you're willing to make it to appear at the department head meeting.
Yep. Just to put out another idea as well. So that's great for departments. And I think we should also include Erica Mooney so that she can send it to all the boards and committees.
Right. Yep. Okay, any further discussion on that topic? I don't think we need to vote. It's not something that requires a resolution. Vince, and then Sarah.
Maybe Sarah should go first.
Okay, Sarah.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that Liz Trillos put something in the chat. I know we weren't taking public comment. I don't know if you...
I did see it. I wanted to finish our discussion first, but
okay.
Thank you for pointing it out. And then Vince, you wanted to say something else?
General thank you to the entire committee for putting this together, getting it corrected with Chuck, and also to Mary in particular for shepherding this through at 2 select board meetings.
Thank you. So Liz Trios did offer a suggestion that the Nantucket Civic League could be helpful in sending this to their 24 member organizations. And I want to point out that any private organization has the opportunity to take this to their group and say the town has adopted this recommendation. That again, I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but if you're involved in an organization and you want to help them be aware of this, run it on your own. Whether it's a civic league or a neighborhood association or a nonprofit that's environmentally aware. Not everybody watches the select board meetings, so we want to get the word out. Peter, yes.
And I know Liz is listening, so Liz, or we should get Liz that coastal homeowners guide so she can get that.
We're coming up to that. So, and any further comment on the resolution? Because I think I'm going to go right into the guide. Fritz?
Just a question. To the extent we want to reference it, is it where is it on the website? Is it on our portion of the website? Is it?
That's a very good question. Yeah, Vince?
Thank you. Yeah, it'll be on the crack portion of the town website, and I just haven't gotten around to sending the email to town admin to Florencia to have it added. It's a simple timing issue on my part, and I apologize.
So it is in the select board's agenda packet for, I guess it was August 5th that they approved it. So you can always get it there. But yes, it would be great to have it. And if there's some way that we can highlight it, Vince, make it first bold, something, saying, arrows on it saying this is the thing, so it's not lost in the list. Yeah, Vince?
Just looking for some advice on this. What would be helpful, I think, is to have the recommendation wording directly on the website itself and a link that goes with it to like a Word document or PDF or whatever, so that people can then open that up and have a look at the whole thing with the supporting information. Anyone any different ideas? I'm just kind of coming up with stuff on the cuff.
So when we talk about the recommendation, I'm thinking of the 2 pages that we submitted to the select board, not just the 1 paragraph that is the actual recommendation. What do other people think?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the whole 2 pages.
Whole 2 pages on the front of the website. Okay, I'll ask for that, please. No worries.
All right. So we're running slow on time here. Let me briefly address the Mass Homeowners Handbook to prepare for coastal hazards. Sarah sent that. I took a look at it. I didn't read it word for word, but it seems to me like an excellent document to accompany our recommendation. And so, Sarah, when we get the education committee to meet again, I'd love for us to talk about how we can get the 2 of them out together. Does anybody else have quick comments on that guide that was linked in the agenda? Sarah, of course.
Yeah, so I went through it, but did not fine tooth comb, and obviously because it's more about coastal hazards and it leans more towards the storms and storm surge and that kind of thing. But there's definitely pieces in it. So it kind of goes shorter term, right? If you're thinking of like immediate hazards, it does talk about sea level rise and erosion, and it has some great diagrams and tables for kind of quick, not sort of quick and dirty things. So I think our education meeting is this Friday, excuse me, and we can take parts of it. We can kind of take cues from it to help us with the education stuff. But also, as you say, Mary, I think it'll be really good to complement some of the recommendations. And because so much more obviously went into this, a document like this, and lots of entities that contributed to it, I think it has more, it might have more weight to people. So I think we can sort of help distribute this more widely. And I think, Pete, to your point, I think this would be a perfect thing for Liz's group to distribute to homeowners. I think would be really helpful.
So this is available in PDF form now, and it said in the announcement of the release that it would be available in print form later. No particular date. One thing that I did was I just did a quick document search for sea level on there, and what I found was that our recommendation tracks very nicely with this booklet. So it is a great resource. And we've got 20 minutes. I'd like to move on to our annual report. Gary, last comment here.
That handbook was just fabulous, and it's very timely.
Yeah.
I mean, just done in July or June or July.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, I'd love to see our education committee or the whole committee get some credit for it. And I think that when you were saying we're going to distribute it with the plan, you're not talking about waiting a year and a half, are you? No. So somehow, by us pushing this out to the public, making it get under the name of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, it's part of the education effort, part of one of our most important initiatives, and it'll get people thinking about our committee and the stuff that they should be thinking about. So the sooner we can get this out, the better.
I would agree. So we'll talk about that more on Friday, I guess, Sarah.
Can I just ask a quick question of the whole group? When we want to, as a committee, distribute something to the community, what's our avenue? Like, do we write a press release and distribute? We don't have an email list. We don't have curious if, as we do want to push things out, how do we do that as a committee?
So I think that goes back to the stakeholder list that we started developing last fall. I think we can put together an email list. I think that will primarily rest on Vince's shoulders. Vince, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mary. You've already covered it. There is a stakeholder list with emails that we started assembling and is in pretty good order. One thing I could do is send that to everyone for potential update, and then we'd have a good quality email list to be able to send around. I like that idea. Okay. Then additionally, we can always put things on the CRAC website and then put that link out. Within our department here in Natural Resources, Monday is my day to post on social media. I can put it there. I can also send it to town admin to put on the town's social media accounts. They usually post once or twice a day. So there's a lot of avenues.
So why don't we continue that discussion on Friday with the Education Committee? Because we do need to move on to the annual report. Okay. The annual report is something that, we're a one-year-old committee. This is the first time we've had to do it. Erica sent out the rules for that. So Vince drafted a response, but said that it would need, obviously, review and approval by the committee. And in particular, he couldn't specify what our goals were for the next year. That's something that we need to discuss. So hoping that everybody's had a chance to read this, it was included with the agenda. Any comments on what was written so far? Gary?
Yes, I have a comment. If you ask me, I think that our main accomplishment has been accomplished last meeting of the select board. I mean, just think, we got the select board to adopt our proposal to have all of these organizations on the island start taking this into consideration. I think that is a more important accomplishment. It's great to have an RFP proposal. It's just an RFP proposal that we're waiting to see the result of, and it's going to be a few months before we end up with a consultant. But in the meantime, we got something done, and we got the select board to bless it, and it's going to start getting everyone on the island, hopefully, a little more sensitive to the issues that they should be thinking about for the future. So I think it's a really important accomplishment. And when I saw what it said, our main accomplishment was writing the RFP, I didn't think that's as important as getting the select board to bless our resolution requiring people to start thinking about these issues.
So Gary, unfortunately, we didn't accomplish that before June 30th.
I see.
And this report is very specific to things that happened before June 30th. So thank you for the cheerleading, but we're bound by the rules here. Other comments?
Way to get that in there anyway.
Yeah. We did mention it as a goal. So we said in the next fiscal year, the CRAC looks forward to seeing the select board adopt their interim recommendation. So that was our first goal. continuing with that paragraph, beginning work on the coastal resilience plan after a consultant is awarded a contract, including public engagement in the process, and continuing to provide information regarding the risks of sea level rise. So that's all we have written outside of the education subcommittee goal for goals for this committee for next year. I am going to point out that our charge from the select board includes several items which we have not really spent much time on in the past year. I think it's fine that we haven't spent time recommending priority of coastal resilience projects because we don't have a plan yet. So that would be a follow-on from the plan. We had talked about, but have not come back to identifying overlap and opportunities for coordination with other town plans. I'm reading this off the website, by the way, including a hazard mitigation, harbor plan, parks plan, open space, recreation, coastal management, stormwater, and master plan. Assisting with obtaining community feedback, including ways to engage seasonal residents, I think that will come as part of the plan development. Reviewing existing regulations, that arguably is what we have done with our recommendation to say that we're making a recommendation because we have no existing regulation addressing sea level rise. So the big one there is the opportunity for coordination with other plans. And I think, do we want to include that as a goal, especially knowing that the master plan is scheduled for rewriting, or I should say updating? Questions, comments? Jen?
I think that as part of working with the consultants as they develop the coastal resiliency plan, that will be part of our role. At least that was kind of my understanding is as the plan gets developed, we can help provide that feedback of where things already exist in other plans and what that overlap is. So I think it fits in with the goals you've already identified, but I don't think it hurts to pull it out within the report itself so that it's mentioned as one of those specific ways in which we're working with the consultant and then working with the plan after it's developed as well.
Okay, other comments? I like that idea. All right, so Jen, do you have a suggestion for language that we would include in that goal? Vince? So we have beginning work on the coastal resilience plan after a consultant is awarded a contract. That's the next to the last paragraph. And then it goes on, including public engagement in the process. Do we want to say, and coordination with other town plans? Does that make sense? Yes, no?
Yes.
Thank you, Fritz. Jen, is that sufficient? Do you want to call that out more specifically, or?
I think that works.
Okay.
I have a hard time wordsmithing without seeing it on paper, but I think however we call that out will be just fine.
Yeah, I've resorted to printing everything out because I can't read what's on the screen and simultaneously see everybody. And my experiment with using two screens, I might have to go back and try that again, but it gets a little interesting. So Vince, were you able to add that in? I'm not seeing it in the paragraph. Vince, you're on mute. Still on mute.
Beg your pardon, I had to stop sharing to come off of mute.
Okay.
No, I didn't get a chance to add it in.
Okay.
I'm looking for...
The
wording,
next to
I'll
last
take whatever
paragraph.
you had there,
Yeah.
Mary, or even Jen.
So I was saying where the second to last paragraph says beginning work on the CRP after a consultant is awarded a contract, including public engagement in the process and coordination with other town plans. So I'm adding and coordination with other town plans.
Sorry, I missed a lot of that. I've been trying to fix my sound problem.
Oh, okay.
I beg your pardon.
All right, so the second to last paragraph, including public engagement in the process, is already there. I'm adding and coordination with other town plans. So that we're calling out those two features of working with the consultants.
Okay, I'm just going to share this again so everyone can see it. Okay, can people hear me for a start? Okay, see this? That's just what I put in. Anything else?
Great. Okay, anyone else have comments on this report to the town of our activities from last year? Or other suggestions for goals for the coming fiscal year?
Yeah, we would just close out even though it's expired.
Is everyone happy with this document? Yeah, okay. Ian, were you waving happy or waving I have a comment?
I think it would read better if we had including public engagement in the process, comma, coordination with other town plans, comma, and continuing to provide information regarding the risks of sea level rise.
I think the intent was that providing information regarding the risks of sea level rise is a separate bullet on our charge from working with the coastal resilience plan. So I'm not sure that we would just string those all together with comments. We could.
So
Those are all within separate points of our charge. Vince, when you wrote it, was the intent that they would be listed separately, or that the working with the consultants would include some of those others? Maybe I was just reading it differently.
Okay, yeah, I don't think the commas or the semicolons make a difference to what I was trying to get at. I'm happy for both. If Ian wants to leave it as commas, that's fine. Once they each come out as separate points, I'm happy.
Yeah, I think that works. I was just reading it differently originally, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone want to make a motion to adopt this report and send it to Erica for inclusion in the town's annual report?
So move.
Fritz, second from Jen.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, Gary?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Ian?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So that is unanimous with 8. Thank you. Okay, so we are waiting for RP Eddie to join us. It's 7 minutes before 11. So I will open up for public comment. If we have any comments, Liz, if you wanted to speak about the Civic League and your offer, happy to have you do that.
I will be talking to them at the next meeting and getting the information out. And once you have your 2 papers together there, I think it would be good to have that for them so that they can see what it is and start to send it out to their different groups.
And Liz, that was Elizabeth Trios, and you're, if I remember correctly, you're on the executive committee of the Civic League, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So you're offering to bring that to the executive committee. Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none. Let me just, from me personally, I really like the idea of sending our recommendation with that state homeowners handbook guide. I think that it both personalizes it to say, hey, this isn't just some state thing coming out. You know, this is also something that is coming from Nantucket. It associates us with it, which I like personally. So hopefully that, you know, is something that we can do. And very glad to see this. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing it to our attention, you know, in such a timely manner. It just came out. All right, I see Katie Banks joining us, and that is probably representing RP Eddie.
Hi, Mary. Yes, he'll be on in just a few minutes. I was just testing it out and making
Thank
sure
you.
it worked and all was well. Nice to see you.
Well, we are ready for him, so we appreciate it.
Oh, he'll be on probably right at 11.
Yep.
Mary?
Yes, Fritz?
Yeah, I don't know if this is on the agenda. I mean, not on the agenda, but public comment or whatever, but just in the interim. I just want to say, congratulate everybody on the committee, and especially Mary, you, for what you've done so far and how you've run this committee. I've been involved with the planning board and other things for about 3 years now. And as far as I'm concerned, this recommendation that we just got approved by the select board is about the most significant thing that I've seen happen in the town in that 3-year period. And I seriously mean that. I mean, we've been trying to do a lot of things on the planning board, but there isn't anything, I think, that took such a major leap forward in terms of regulatory, what will be regulatory spurs behind coastal resiliency and a lot of the things we're all concerned about. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody on the committee. It's a pleasure to be on this committee, really.
Thank you, Fritz. I don't know if those words have ever been said before.
So anyway.
Sarah, did you have something?
Oh yeah, just while we're talking, I just wanted to follow up on the homeowner guide. I think one of the goals for the education committee on Friday is maybe we can write sort of a cover letter, or at least like a little announcement to go with it. So obviously we can't put our stamp on it, it's not our document, but we can sort of, in the absence of a press release, but like something that makes it come from us, and that it's to Gary's point about aligning really well with our recommendation. And so I think we can kind of wordsmith that on Friday.
Vince, I'm looking at the committee's website. We do not have a meeting posted for Friday for the education committee.
I'm currently in the middle of drafting an email to Sarah about that.
Okay.
So just to also add to Sarah's point, this homeowners handbook is something that's going to go on to the Coastal Resilience library as well. How about it has an accompanying document, separate, but kind of something from the education subcommittee about it, particular points that would be relevant to Nantucket for the sake of argument?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think, you know, I started to make notes myself, like in particular, Appendix B is like a checklist for homeowners. So it's like, make sure you think about this and make sure you think about that. And it's nice because it takes all the details that are in the document and breaks it out into like, not every point might be pertinent to your particular home. Like erosion might not be, sorry, I just froze for a sec. Erosion might not be pertinent to you in particular if you're, you know, a certain spot. So you have different things to think about in the immediacy. But anyway, it's I think I like that point of thinking, like, if you're only going to look at one part, maybe check out Appendix B or Part 4, which is just about all the things you can do to protect your home kind of stuff. But I think that's great. I had the education committee on my calendar. I think that's the date that we had selected at our last meeting, but I didn't follow up as the chair this week to make the agenda and everything. And I knew that Vince was out, so I'm sorry that we might have to postpone it since it's cutting close. I'm not really sure. We'll send some emails around, I guess.
Vince, go ahead.
Sarah, I'm very happy if we can get agenda posted today. I'm kind of reading off an email that I was just sending you.
Okay.
Once we can get it posted today or tomorrow morning, and yourself, Mary, and Graham are happy to attend a meeting on Friday, I can organize it.
Okay, we'll do this after the meeting, but I can we can talk about it.
All right, thank you. I'm glad that's moving forward. I want to point out that Liz Trio sent another chat message, and to make sure that it's written into the record. Liz said, "Thank you, Fritz. The work you've all been doing is the best I've seen in the years I've watched things." So thank you, Liz Trios, for that. All right. Why don't I offer that if the plan that I had set up with RP was we had sent him a number of questions to respond to first. So I plan to read a short introduction, say hello, and then he'll speak for a while, and then we'll follow up with additional questions. So that's the format. If anybody has something that that they want to interrupt, and if I don't see you raise your hand, then maybe send a chat message, and I probably will see that. So welcome to RP Eddy, who's joining us. RP, can we hear you?
Hi, you tell me.
Yes, you can. Thank you.
We have all the right things set up here. Yep. Nice to see all of you.
Thank you for coming today.
And that is an impressive wall of books. You might win. In all the worlds, all the Zoom calls I've had, you might have the largest number of books behind you that I've seen.
All right, so I reached out to RP Eddy asking him to join us in one of our meetings. RP has a degree in neuroscience and is the founder and CEO of Ergo, an intelligence and advisory firm which serves governments and corporations. He is the former National Security Council Director who led the process to build the first White House policy on pandemic diseases, and co-author of the best-selling and award-winning book Warnings with a fellow NSC official, Richard Clark. Their book examines and warns of 7 possible catastrophic scenarios, including a pandemic much like today's and sea level rise. Since January, RP and his team foresaw the magnitude of the incipient COVID-19 crisis and shifted considerable resources at Ergo to build a one-of-a-kind intelligence platform called the COVID-19 Intelligence Forum. RP has also been working with the Nantucket project since March to provide insights into the COVID-19 crisis, including recording 1 episode with Select Board members Don Holgate and Matt Fee. Welcome again, RP. Thank you for joining us today. Looks like you have a nice, maybe a little overcast day there. So you're not on the island where we actually have sun.
I'm on Fishers. It's going to get hot sooner rather than later, but we're in a pretty similar weather pattern, I suspect.
All right, RP, would you like an introduction to the people that you see on the screen? Happy to have us call off our names if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Mary Longacre. I am the chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and a member at large from the public. We call off Gary. You want to go ahead next? And you're on mute, Gary.
Yeah. Okay. RP, I'm Gary Beller. I'm the chair of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers, and that's my role on this committee.
Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Boyce, and I'm a member at large. I'm a scientist at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation on island, and I am also the chair of our education subcommittee.
Thank you, Sarah. And Peter?
Hi, RP. My name is Peter Brace. I am the secretary for the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board.
Graham?
Hi, Graham Durovich. I'm a member at large. I also am a town employee as the Recycling and Waste Coordinator.
Ian?
My name is Ian Golding, and I represent the Conservation Commission on this committee.
Jen?
I'm Jen Carberg. I'm a research ecologist with the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, who I actually represent on this board as one of the largest landowners on the island.
Fritz?
I'm Fritz McClure, and I'm a member of the Town of Nantucket Planning Board, and that's a representative from that board on this committee.
And Vince.
Hi, RP, and also thanks to Katie for organizing and appreciate it. I'm Vince Murphy, in the Natural Resources Department. I'm the Coastal Resilience Coordinator. I'm the staff person from the town to this committee. And I've been an ecologist for the better part of 15, 18 years. Some minor work as a got me enough experience to be able to do this kind of stuff. Good to meet you.
And we also have two members of the public. I'm not going to do introductions for them, but if we have the opportunity, we may open it up for questions from the public at the end of the meeting. So RP, at the end of warnings is a brief discussion of how to prevent or mitigate the effects of a catastrophe and how to persuade people to take a warning seriously. We invited you here today to talk to us in that vein. Are there lessons that we can learn from the COVID-19 crisis to apply to our response to sea level rise?
Okay, well, first, thank you all very much for spending a little bit of time with me. It's an honor to be with you. Nantucket has a special place in my heart. I've spent some, as many people have been there, I've spent some lovely, lovely times there. We have some old family connections there, and I'm glad to see people being so responsible across so many sectors of society to help protect that lovely, lovely island. Islands, of course, are particular prey for climate change, and so you're doing the right thing at the right time, and it's an honor to be with you. It's a small, intimate group, so let me try to make this as high value for you as possible. You have scientists here who have forgotten more than I'll ever know about these topics. If there's anything I would suggest that where I can be of any help to you, would be along the lines of the questions I think we have laid out here, and to talk about how. Let me back up a little bit, Mary, if you don't mind, and give just a little bit of a background on the way we think about these things. And I can even do a slide or two if I can figure out how to do this properly. Richard Clark, my co-author, who's of much greater fame than I, were part of a small team chasing a guy named Osama bin Laden in 0001, 99, going back to 94. And obviously, we failed dramatically at our attempts to stop him. And Dick and I sat down one day, looking out at the situation you guys are looking at, thinking about how we blew it and how we were unable to get the message across that we so fervently knew. And you'll see how this is relevant to you, right? We couldn't get the message across that we so fervently knew that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were going to be a crisis for America if we didn't deal with it more seriously, more rapidly. And as we were thinking about that and drinking a bottle of scotch, and really, it's a pretty depressing conversation for Dick to have, as it was nominally his job to protect America from Al-Qaeda at the time, right? He was the head of counterterrorism for the US government. Reality is he did make a ton of warnings. He wrote memo after memo. He called meeting after meeting. He moved resources where they ought to be. He had very creative and exciting ideas. They were doing okay under Clinton, not great. And then when they got to President Bush 43's first term, the agenda shifted, as it does with new leaders. And the agenda shifted away from Al-Qaeda. And of course, 9/11 happened, 9 months after, right? So how did that happen? How did a obvious threat, one that we knew in stark detail, still befall us? How did we still get struck by that? And we reminded ourselves of Greek mythology, a woman named Cassandra. Cassandra refused to sleep with one of the gods. And as a penalty, she could see the future. Well, it doesn't sound so bad, right? Except her penalty particularly was, you can see the future, but only catastrophes. She lived in a town called Troy. You remember what happened with Troy, the Trojan horse. And so Cassandra, this beautiful mortal, saw her town in her dreams get destroyed by fire. She saw her brothers and her parents burned to death. She saw all the horrors that were about to happen. And she went on and on telling everybody about this, and was ignored and ridiculed for being, crazy. And when in fact she was quite correct. So then when it did actually happen, she survived and she watched all this happen. So Cassandras are these very real people amongst us who give us very stark warnings and are ignored, and crisis occurs. I'll give you one right now. The horrible explosion in Beirut. There was a man in charge of security at that port, And he repeatedly was warning, we've got 2,700 tons of ANFO, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, or just ammonium nitrate, sitting inside this thing. It's an explosion waiting to happen. We have to move it. Over and over and over, warning, over and over, ignored. Now, let me make one kind of caveat I have to make. Dick, certainly nor I, claimed to be a Cassandra about 9/11. We didn't say Al-Qaeda in the United States into towers with airplanes in September or anything like that. He said it's a very generalized threat. He wrote a memo that said, what's it going to take? This is in quotes now. What's it going to take? The bodies of thousands of dead Americans laying in the streets until we take this seriously, question mark. And that's what it took. And he wrote that memo before 9/11. He finally got the meeting he wanted on 9/10. Obviously, there wasn't enough time to do anything. So, but we don't claim that Dick was actually a Cassandra. We think that Dick had a very vague view of a pressing threat, but not a very specific view. So the 7 threats in the beginning of our book, and I'm sorry, I'm not pulling up slides here because there's some pretty good graphics.
Vince, do we need to make RP a host for him to be able to screen share?
I haven't even tried yet.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just sort of, here, let me try. Let's see if I can do this.
You're a co-host now.
Share screen. Here we go. Let's see if this works. Y'all can see that? Can y'all see that? Okay. So, you know, there's Cassandra, she's in the sky, et cetera, et cetera. So what we discovered was, as we looked across a whole variety of Cassandras who have given very specific warnings. And if you look at this list, you have the space shuttle explosion, you have 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, Fukushima.
I'm sorry, Vince, can you mute? I think that's your background noise.
Give me a chance to get some coffee. As we looked at all those, so if you look at the beginning of this list, these were folks who gave highly specific warnings that on date X, catastrophe Y is going to happen unless you do Z. They were ignored, catastrophe happened, okay? Again, much more specific than Dick's warning about Al-Qaeda. The Space Shuttle Challenger explosion, I think we're all old enough to remember this. The man who designed the O-rings that failed said, if you launch that space shuttle tomorrow, it's going to fail, it's going to blow up, the astronauts will die, because this small piece will fail at temperatures under 40 degrees, don't do it. He was ignored, it happened. He literally was the man who designed that O-ring, right? And that story kind of goes on through this list. If you get to the bottom of the list in yellow, those are 3 of the 7 things that we discuss in the book and say, here are pending warnings. Here are potential Cassandra events. Now, it's not a Cassandra event till it hits, but here are people that fit our descriptions of Cassandras, which we'll talk about in a second, which can be relevant for you, that we should think about and see if we should ignore them or not. Going back, Lori Garrett is one of them. Lori Garrett, who you need, if you want to know anything about disease, want anything about Corona, you have to read Lori Garrett's work. She was a senior fellow at CFR. She's won the Pulitzer, the Polk, and the Peabody, which is sort of the trifecta for a journalist. She's an absolutely brilliant woman. I adore her. And she's written a number of best-selling books about the coming plague. The name of one of them is called The Coming Plague. We put her in chapter 11 of our book. That's the second half of the book, where he said, here's folks giving warnings we better listen to. And if you take a look, if you go to my Twitter account, the pinned tweet is actually, it's right down here. You know, it nails what's going on, right? So this chapter describes where we are right now. And if you get into that chapter, it talks about the need for the White House to lead a response. What does it mean to think at a federal level about this disease? I mean, unfortunately, Lori, our Cassandra in this chapter, was dead right about where we are now. So she was one Cassandra of the future that we predicted that we should listen to. Of course, unfortunately, she proved to be right. Another one is Jim Hansen. This becomes very relevant to you. You all, I would be shocked if anyone on this call doesn't know what Jim Hansen is. If you don't, go read his work. So we wrote about Jim in 2017. He is kind of the father of modern sea level rise theory. And his story is very illustrative for, I think, the challenge that you might face. So Jim Hansen in the 80s wrote some of the early papers on sea level rise, and he had the audacity to not get them peer reviewed. He published them anyway. He went out and said, look, we are altering the climate through carbon emissions. We're going to have sea level rise. It's going to have an impact. We need to wake up. He was pilloried by his peers, pilloried. he was pilloried by his employer, who was NASA. He is a very strong human being, so that gave him fuel for his fight, and he went on and on and on for decades outside the mainstream. It was probably 10 years outside the mainstream from Jim's first paper until where a huge number of folks inside the scientific establishment, again, you know, sort of mocked him and thought that he was wrong until he was proven to be profoundly correct. And now, of course, he's embraced as a Cassandra, a seer, someone who got this right. Jim, in 2015, 5 years ago, wrote an article, and he followed the Jim Hansen pattern. He didn't peer review his study. He wrote an article that said, as you can see in top left here, by 2100, sea levels will rise 6 to 15 feet, which is 5 to 10 times faster than most science has told us so far. So at the time, again, look, we already knew in 2015, of course, we were in big trouble. We already knew it was basically settled science minus the outliers, the outlier critics. But Jim came along and said, it's worse than you think, 2015. Jim's, again, he kind of got pilloried. Now, not as hard as he had back in the 80s, because he sort of proven his mettle. People understood the science better, but he still got ridiculed for sending this paper out without, you know, more peer review and more thought of other experts into it. Unfortunately, Jim appears to be right yet again. So this is the second half of our book, written in 2017. Experts who we are afraid might be actual Cassandras. Catastrophe might struck as they paint it. Jim Hansen, unfortunately. Lori Garrett was right. Jim Hansen, unfortunately, appears to be right as well. So this gets very much to your life. You have seen all these visualizations about what happens to New York City when sea level rise. You've seen pictures, obviously, in your own island of what happens. You're living amidst this. So let me use that just as an intro, and I will stop the screen share. And why don't I now, if you'll just let me talk a little more, Mary.
Yes, of course.
Actually, why don't I then sort of try to answer the question you asked me a number of minutes ago, but I wanted to give you context of what was going on here. So bear with me as I arrange my windows. There we go. So punchline of that, and maybe the punchline. So we wrote a book about how to determine who's right when they warn. And we created a list of metrics called the Cassandra Coefficient. I should have shown it to you a second ago. It's 21 metrics. Effectively, it says, look, the guy walking down the street with a sandwich board on that says the sky is going to fall, you probably can ignore him for the reasons we all understand. The person who is the multi-degreed expert, who has studied the particular science of which they are warning, who has a series of other characteristics, is probably the person you want to listen to twice. Doesn't mean they're right. But Harry Markopolos, who was the guy who said Bernie Madoff is a fraud 10 years before Madoff was finally exposed, was a certified fraud examiner. He ran hedge funds himself. He had all the proper expertise to know what a fraud looked like. And he presented highly technical explanations about why Madoff was a fraud. Literally to the point where he, and I won't get into it, but he proved mathematically to the SEC that Bernie Madoff was a fraud. He was ignored. Of course, Madoff went on for 10 more years, causing massive destruction. There are characteristics to warners you need to listen to. And you can understand what they are. Now, they are not people across science. And one of you, I don't think anyone said you're from Woods Hole. There's a statistician from Woods Hole, and I hope it's not one of you on the call, who wrote an article about Corona and about how Corona, it was a regression analysis, I think, of Corona, and it was wrong, right? So it was a person who was a marine oceanographer using their basis in science to go into a field they don't understand, and they wrote a piece that was inaccurate that ended up being relatively influential in Wall Street. Now, our Cassandra Coefficient, the 24 factors, would tell you, listen to experts multi-degreed in the area where they're speaking. Now, you might say, well, that's relatively obvious. We've made this mistake before. In the millennium, the year 2000 bug concern, the Y2K concern, the person who was most adamant about Y2K being a crisis, who was probably wrong, was a PhD, but in the wrong field. Okay, so enough of that. Final punchline, the book we need to write is how do you get the message out? So the book we wrote was what message matters? How do you pay attention? Why is that person ignored? What's the power of the critics? What's the power of the Cassandras we talk about? The book we need to write is how do organizations or people who feel they have a warning that must be heard, how do they get the message out? How do they get not ignored? How do we include How do we get more inclusion in decision-making so that that view is listened to? How do you empower someone to be a better convincer of the work they strongly believe in? And that might be something you as an entity are thinking about. So I'll stop there. Mary, you asked me a question I didn't answer, but I think if I talk any further, you guys might just hang up your Zooms.
Well, I think where you ended is exactly where we want to begin. You know, I would say that, you know, the federal and state response to the COVID-19 crisis demonstrates the necessity of getting it right the first time to mitigate the severity of the crisis. You know, with coastal resilience, you know, response to sea level rise, response to climate change, I would say that we haven't yet got it right the first time. You know, what can we learn to create that sense of urgency, or to be more convincing, as you say, about the need to address these in order to mitigate the severity?
We talk about something in the book. We do a review of a lot of human biases. I suspect all of you have done your reading on human biases. If you haven't, it's fascinating and worth doing. You know, we have a wet computer between our ears that was designed about 140,000 years ago. When you really begin to understand what that thing does, you realize we're just bags of meat driven by biases and heuristics. Like, what actually comes out of here first is not deep cognitive process. It's not prefrontal cortex thinking, it's animal response. And you find that increasing at moments of tension. We enter what my friend Adam Robinson calls the stupid zone. So as you enter and explain to people things they don't understand, as you raise the stakes, those limbic responses, meaning the animal responses, become even more prevalent, right? Even if you're talking to highly educated people. So you talking about, and I presume to some extent, advocating for attention on climate change in a particularly hard corner because of what we could sort of summarize as complexity mismatch. So there's a number of experts and scientists on this call. I am not a climate expert, but I was raised partly by one. He's one of the great sea level rise experts in the world. His name is Dr. Charles Fletcher from University of Hawaii, and he's an extraordinary expert on beach erosion. Nonetheless, I just wanted to give him a shout out because he's excellent. He's my godfather. I am not, as I said, an expert on this topic, but a number of people are. Complexity mismatch means when you begin to describe something highly technical to the person who's not highly technically trained, they enter the stupid zone. They get sort of activated in a way that they become defensive. And if you add all the other things that kind of are necessary to confront sea level rise, you're asking people to make sacrifices they don't want to make about a problem they don't understand, and about a problem they're not going to understand at the scientific level like some of you do. That's a very hard puzzle. That's the same puzzle for example, the risk of superintelligence. That was the same puzzle the SEC examiners had when Harry Markopolos walked in and told them Bernie Madoff was a fraud. How could that be? Because the SEC examiners were liberal arts majors. Basically, they were lawyers. Many government officials are. Many decision makers are. Harry Markopolos gave them very heavy math and science, proving on a whiteboard in a series of charts with some, sort of like college level stats that that Madoff was a fraud. They didn't understand it. He didn't present it in a way they could understand it. And then he got upset with them and cursed at them. He had an off-putting personality, which is another problem we talk about. And they walked away from it. He cursed at them. Very easy for them to say, screw this guy, we're not going to pay attention. Complexity mismatch. It was too complex for them to get it. He didn't communicate it properly. He lost his cool. He lost the argument. So complexity mismatch is one challenge. But let's remember that elected officials can have, when they make smart, hard decisions fast, they can have dramatic impact. So the coronavirus, this is it. This is exactly the case study. You all know, I hope, that America is profoundly behind in doing an extraordinarily poor job in our response to this disease. And you can make excuses for why, but they're basically inadequate excuses. You can look at Germany, South Korea, China, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, basically every country other than Brazil, to some extent Spain, Italy, and we are doing worse than everyone else in the world by a massive factor. And if you had to ask me why, I would say it would be because we didn't have leaders making dramatic decisions backed by science, right? So your job is to get leaders to make dramatic decisions backed by science. The problem with this, and you've seen people write this, is America failed the marshmallow test. And you're going to find people failing the marshmallow test as well, right? The marshmallow test, you all recall. Does anyone not remember what the marshmallow test is? It's a 5 to 7-year-old children sat in a room by a researcher. Picture just the white research room that we all read about. And the researcher puts a marshmallow in front of them and says, all right, Sally, I'll be back in 5 minutes. And when I come back in 5 minutes, if that one marshmallow is still here, you get another marshmallow. Or eat the marshmallow, it's up to you. And a lot of kids eat the marshmallow, a lot of kids don't. Longitudinal studies show the children who don't eat the marshmallow, who build mechanisms to show whatever those traits are more successful in life. America failed the marshmallow test when it came to Corona. The president couldn't do the lockdowns he should have done, which other countries did. He didn't want the economic cost of 6 weeks of lockdown. So now we have the greatest economic downturn in history. Literally, right? Our last quarter was the worst quarter we've ever had as measured. That was only one quarter, so you're not into a full depression yet. So strong science, dramatic decisions, effective leaders. Punchline, how do you do that? You have to tell stories that either give hope or embarrassment to the leaders, that are highly personalized. So let's go back to the Challenger explosion. I'm not remembering the name. The company was called Morton Thiokol. Roger Bourgeois was the scientist. Roger designed the O-ring that he knew would fail tomorrow. He knew if they launched that Challenger that the 8 astronauts would burn to death. So he screamed and yelled. He finally got their attention. He was there. And they said, all right, Roger, come on, do a presentation tomorrow. And of course, they framed it wrong. Prove to us it will explode. Well, it's not the way to ask the question, right? Prove to me Nantucket will be underwater. No. That's not how we need to do it. Prove to me the Challenger will explode. So he did a presentation, which is still on the internet. You can look it up. Roger Bourgeois, look it up. And it's that great expert of graphic displays of argumentation, whose name I'm forgetting, uses it a lot as a bad example of how to make an argument. Pages and pages of complex mathematical theory. The bullet point punchline was like the last of 20 pages. They said, look, we're not convinced. And of course, we all know what happened. Alternatively, if he had said, Sam, sitting across the table from me, head of NASA, here's the New York Times headline from tomorrow. Sam ignores scientists, 8 astronauts die, with his picture. Maybe Sam would have gotten the message. Think about people in your life who are great at convincing you of things. They tell you stories, not statistics. So they show you pictures, like some of the photos we had before of the main streets in Nantucket underwater, photos of Miami underwater. It has to be, you have to limbically activate people, much like the other side does, to get them to understand what you're doing. So tell stories, make it real, have the leaders understand that by name, that this is something they can either win with or they can lose with. Literally, there's an app that we found somewhere on the internet. I mean, I've used it for 20 years. You can create what looks like a New York Times headline. And it looks like you took the New York Times and ripped the page across and you paste it on a PowerPoint. And I think there might've been some of the slides we showed before, right? People respond to that. So when we go back to the beginning about Dick trying to convince President Bush to take Al-Qaeda more seriously, what if Dick had been able, now he wrote that memo, what will it take thousands of Americans laying dead in the street before you take this seriously? What if he had a picture, what if there was another way for him to do it to make the president more limbically activated? Could that have happened? Could that have improved his outcomes? So again, lots of topics there, but I hope I touched on some of your questions.
Thank you. Jen, you had a question which I think might follow pretty well from that one. That was about long-term planning. Do you want me to read that or do you want to ask that?
I can ask it. This
Okay.
is the next one you have on the list, right?
Yeah, right.
It was kind of the idea that communities tend to be reactionary. We talk about this a lot, that we can respond to catastrophes, but not necessarily put the future planning in place. And the idea that particularly here in our community, we often have, when we look at funds for planning for the future versus funds for things we need to spend now, the now typically wins out over planning for the future. So, we need to buy new fire trucks versus we need to put the money behind, figuring out coastal solutions on the waterfront for 10 years from now. So the idea, what effective techniques can we to kind of push that forward thinking planning as opposed to the reactionary planning?
Yeah, awesome question, right? So short-termism is a huge problem in our world, particularly in our country. And it gets to the argument about like, actually the best leadership is a benevolent hegemon, but you know, we're not gonna get there anytime soon, I hope. Let me just, I'm having a little computer problem, so give me 1 second here. Hopefully that's gonna work. All right. Sorry. Okay. So I would say sea level rise visualizations. So if I'm you, I'm a real big believer in evolutionary biology and that we act largely based on how we evolved. You heard me talk about the 140,000-year-old white computer between your ears. Like your audience makes its decisions based on that thing. You may think of yourself as a higher evolved thinker. You may believe you're beyond, you know, your limbic mind or your monkey brain. And most of the time, maybe you are. Your audience always isn't always, nor are you always. So figure out a way that you can attack and make them limbically activated so they understand your argument very quickly. So images are a good one. So sea level rise visualizations are a very powerful tool, I would say. There are scenarios that are a bit traumatic, but they're not out of the plausibles. We talked about them earlier about Hansen. 6 to 8 feet sea level rise by 2100 is definitely in the realm of science. And if you think about what's going on there on your little island, you could put some visualizations together that should grab everyone's attention pretty profoundly. Now, on a broader scale, you know, what I'm probably more interested in, because I don't live on your island, is the rapid collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet and other things that are going to lead to this massive crisis. And what does that mean globally? Now, so like Bangladesh, India, you know, and I'll just do this very quickly because I think it's fascinating. It's not relevant exactly to you. I can paint a very cogent story for you about the rise of totalitarian governments inside Europe and other places based on sea level rise, which leads to refugee flows. And we've already seen it happen with Syrian migrants going into Europe and how the body politic responded, right? So we can do that later. But if you can start telling stories using sea level rise visualizations about what's going to happen on your island, if you can track these things regularly, and again, you may well do this, I hope you do. If you can begin to find a way to get people activated about what's happening on your island, then you will begin to win against the short-termism that they must fall to. Remember the debt clock that used to be, there was a few of them, there was one in Lower Manhattan, the debt clock, this big, huge number, it may even still be there, about how big the American debt was, you know, trillions of dollars. It was up there every day for people to see. It actually mattered. You know, studies have shown that kind of thing. So is there a way you can stay in front of people, showing them what's going to happen to your beautiful island as sea level rise occurs and why you need to get in charge of it? You know, that would be one concept I would encourage you to do. But short-termism is a very, very big deal. Another idea is not me, right? Because I'm not a climate change expert, but talks like this, education like this can have real impact, right? So communicate not just the distant impacts, but the ones that are already in play, with experts, with great visualizations. There are some great documentaries right now that scratch the surface on these topics. You should do that. I mentioned this point again, but let me be very specific. You have scientists on this group. I presume you're already examining your local data, your tide gauges, your weather stations. You're looking at trends in temperature, sea level, number of extreme tide days. You're looking at extreme hot days, etc. You should have a website where you're graphing it, you're showing it, and people can see it. Right? So we all kind of go, holy shit, there was tornadoes in Chicago yesterday. That's unusual. There haven't been tornadoes in Chicago since the 60s. Or we say there's great whites coming up here by Fisher. That's unusual. Well, what's going on here? That's anecdotal and real, and it matters. And I think those of you on this call know that that's actually an example of what climate change is doing. Is there a way you can graphically represent that on a trend line, longitudinally, so that your audience can get it? Now, one other point, probably you more than me, but I have tried to have arguments with people about issues I hold dear. And I do it, I don't know why I do it, but I've had arguments with people who say mask wearing is stupid, for example, right? And I have, well, not arguments, conversations. I want to learn what they're thinking. I want to know how they could be so, in my point of view, so wrong-headed. I shouldn't say that, but like, look, if you think wearing a mask is a bad idea, you're out to lunch in my mind. But I want to have those conversations. And I've tried to do this with people who argue against climate change. I'm kind of coming to the point that I think it's a wasted effort with a large number of people, right? So you know them, there's certain folks that, you know, you begin a conversation with them, they're so adamant about it, the science is a lie, and this Hansen's crazy, or whatever it is. At some point, you got to give up on some people, but there's a ton of people you don't have to give up on. And if you think about how to educate them, the ways we've discussed, using credentialed messengers, you know, every quarter having a talk, tracking these things longitudinally, looking at extreme hot days, telling the story, finding a way to maybe put a billboard up or something, you're going to slowly, no pun intended, turn the tide of the body politic, and the short-termism ideally will give way to the larger challenge.
Thank you. And I think that we are doing that on Nantucket. We have several scientific organizations who have had some wonderful speakers in the last couple of years, this summer in particular. We have some artwork projects. We have several groups that have sprung up to try and communicate more directly with the public. So I'm glad that we are making that effort, and hopefully it will be fruitful. Did anyone on the committee want to jump in with a question or a follow-up for RP at this time?
Sure.
Okay, Ian, please.
RP, thank you very much. I mean, you reminded me of Richard Feynman when he did that O-ring demonstration with the ice water.
There you go.
If that had happened the day before.
There you go. Great example, Ian. Yes. Do you all know this story?
Yeah.
Tell the story, Ian.
Oh, yeah. You go ahead. You're a much better speaker than I am.
I actually didn't know it was Feynman. They had a congressional committee at the end, after the Challenger exploded, to figure out what went wrong. And as I understand the story, and please correct me, in the middle of this hearing table, Feynman took a piece of the rubber material, I guess it was Feynman, that failed, right? The O-ring. So just to make, you know, big, huge solid rocket booster. I think they were the liquid rocket boosters. I don't remember. They must have been liquid rocket boosters. And there was a big O-ring in one of them, in all of them. And Bourgeois, the scientist, said, I designed that thing, it's going to fail because it's too cold. It'll be brittle. That's the story, right? So they're sitting at this hearing table, and again, I guess it was Feynman, took a piece of that material and put it in a cup of ice water just during the conversation. As everyone's kind of watching, he sort of conspicuously did that, and they talked and talked and talked. And then at the end of it, he took it out and somehow just smashed it, and it broke into 100 pieces, showing them that this thing was brittle and it's going to break if cold. And that's what happened. That's how the Challenger blew up. It was pretty obvious to everybody because he made it very graphic and obvious. So great example, Ian.
So follow up to that, I think in many ways it comes down to money. In other words, if you're the Koch brothers or if you're Exxon, as we know, they've been very effective at casting through their allies like the Oil Street Journal enough of doubt, to where we are. I was actually present representing a private foundation at the UN's IPCC fourth assessment report in 2007. And, so 13 years after it was absolutely obvious what the science had to say, I watch with disbelief at still at the national level what's taking place. And I don't know how Jim Hansen gets up in the morning, and God bless him, if there's a pantheon of scientific saints for the 21st century, he sure is one at the top in my. So anyway, thank you for a really interesting talk. I mean, whenever I bring up the idea of actually starting to raise our taxes to go forward for spending for some of the infrastructure, I mean, every realtor, please don't take this wrong, any realtor who probably isn't watching this, they absolutely object because, it might affect real estate prices. Nobody wants to raise taxes, even though we have, I think, the fourth lowest rate of taxation on our properties in the Commonwealth of 300 communities. So it's a very awkward situation when you really want to try and deal with these issues going forward, because it's going to cost money.
That's amazing. I didn't realize how low your tax rate was. I'm sort of surprised.
So I'm sorry, RP, did you want to continue a response or?
I think, Ian, I agree with you. Everything you said. I don't know. Is there something, if there was a question there, I didn't hear it, but I thought your comments were excellent.
Well, thank you. I guess if I have a question, it would be, would you say that the actual computer simulation and visualization is a very effective method of trying to bring to people what is going to take place?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so many hijackings. There's an analogy that a person much smarter than I taught me about the process of winning an argument or getting someone to a destination, and it's a train ride. So you get on the train together, and you say, look, we need to do X, raise taxes so that we're more prepared for sea level rise, or we need to, you know, start getting the government more engaged to, you know, wall off critical assets that are, we're going to high exposure areas that we're going to start dealing with, whatever it is. I believe, you know, my dialogue partner on my train ride here, we have to get there. And every stop on that train is a way they exit the conversation, right? So one of the early ones is like, this will require sacrifice from you. Right? You will have to pay more taxes, or, you know, maybe you should eat less meat, or maybe it's time for you to start thinking about a battery powered car, or maybe you need to vote science, not tax, or planet, not tax. You know, like all those are exits people are going to get off the train. And as I was saying in the beginning, less artfully, people are just going to get off at exit 1 anyway, stop 1 anyway. There's a lot of people you're not going to win over. So to keep that person on the train and to have them go on that intellectual journey with you so that they accept the proven science, you know, it's a very hard thing to do. And I tend to believe on issues I've worked on over the years, I did a lot of work on HIV/AIDS, trying to convince African leaders and American leaders and Catholic leaders that, you know, condoms are good and testing is good and this isn't a gay plague. What we kind of found over time was you're really going to win the argument with the younger generations, and you're not going to win with the bishops. And I mean that as an example, and I mean that also as a reality. Like, we had conversations with the Vatican, and, you know, they're not going to change. You're not going to change their mind, but you're going to begin to change the mind of younger people. So education in that direction, I think, is very important. And if you think about how we did it with drunk driving, how we did it with seatbelts, how we did it with cigarettes, it's the same process. It worked in those 3 instances. This requires more of a sacrifice in some instances because you're going to have to raise taxes, et cetera. But I would say that's it. So visualizations of sea level rise, yes. Taping off areas at certain times, right? So if you can find areas that people are normally using, ideally that are belong to the government, so you can do this, and you tape them off, and you say, you know, in X number of years, this will be underwater, and have a demonstration like that. So they walk by and they go, what's this all about? And they see that this won't be here anymore. But people are, again, back to evolutionary biology, people need to viscerally feel the message you're giving them. If you're asking them to make a sacrifice, expect it to be very hard to get them to sign up for that. Expect that the next generation can be taught better than the current. And that's what activism is all about, right? And that's what, I don't know on your organization if you guys have different points of view on this, but I suspect most of you, based on your backgrounds, are trying to get the word out and trying to protect your island from the proven science of sea level rise.
Vince, go ahead with a question.
Thank you. Hi, RP. So this is kind of somewhat of a basic question. Excuse me. Wrong time for a frog. I end up doing a lot of talking to people. I end up talking to people on this committee. People attend these committee meetings, and I frequently feel like I'm preaching to the converted. Everyone here understands and appreciates it. So I end up trying to find ways, as you said, of bringing people into the tent. I want to get more people, the people who have contradictory views, which is fine, everyone can have them, but just to get the idea out that this is still a problem, because sea level rise is so insidious. It's creeping, but my biggest problem is sometimes I end up having problems as a storyteller. I end up getting too technical too quickly. I end up saying, look, if you look at trend lines, if you look at the R value, the P value, how realistic is this? What are the chances? And you come up with a high P value and you can say, this is great. Suddenly I've lost already 3 or 4 people on the screen who have glazed over, and I end up with a problem. The visualization is great and it's been pushed before. I really liked your idea of roping off a section of an area of town to say, look, this is a terrific way of showing, say by 2100, this will be gone. But then people might say, well, what's this blue line quite far inland about? Interpretation ends up being one of my biggest problems. I'm not really sure that I have a question. It's just, how do you try and get a message across, or at least the embryo of an idea across to a person that doesn't want to hear it?
Yeah, that's the pickle, right? So in Jim Hansen's case, and I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of meeting Jim, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, Jim is not a public speaker by any measure. And I mean, profoundly more interested in speaking to one-on-one or writing papers and speaking to a group. Yet his message finally got out, right? And we recall why. It was his marriage with Al Gore, and then participant media in that great film, and The Inconvenient Truth, and Inconvenient Truth. So a deep Cassandra credentialed expert, you know, like a deep expert on the topic, marries a, what do you want to call it? Like a great communicator, and you end up with a real movement. So that's one answer. So though, you know, this is why everyone like Leonardo DiCaprio is so exciting, because, you know, people listen to him. You know, we are again, evolutionary biology, right? Like there's some folks that just capture our attention and some folks that just don't. And you're talking about complexity mismatch again. This is a topic where people they don't know what you know. They don't want to know that they don't know what you know, because that suggests that they have to admit that they have some level of ignorance, which our brains don't ever want to do. And they don't want to, then you get into like, and you have to make a sacrifice, and they're getting off that train at all these exits. They're not paying attention. So, you know, I think your concept of bringing people into the tent versus preaching the converted is brilliant. And if I were you, I would think about like my hours, right? I'd say like, look, I don't know if anyone on this call right now doubts anything that Jim Hansen would say, or any of you that are, you know, recognizing the realities of climate change are saying, meaning I'm not sure if this hour is worthwhile. Now, if there's any tools we're coming up with together here that can help you get outside the tent, better. But make sure you're not just sitting around preaching the converted. And if you think about, just as a footnote, so if you look at your news feed, your social media groups, who you're talking to, there are AI bots inside YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all these things that are letting you be the water that goes downhill, right? They're leading you to the easiest areas possible. They want to bring you to a place where you're not being challenged, because then you keep clicking. You stay on the website. Now, if Facebook, when I go up to my Facebook page, if all of a sudden there was a bunch of anti-mask people up there and there was a bunch of whatever, things that I think are just absurd, I probably wouldn't want to come back to Facebook anymore. They know that. So it's just people more and more like me, more and more like me. And this is what's happening with micromedia bubbling, with social media. There is no broadcast news anymore. The broadcast news that is there is totally different than it used to be. It's a whole different issue, right? But think about that in your own life. Are you broadening your circle? Are you being intellectually brave? Are you reaching out to new groups? Are you talking to students? Are you putting up public signs? Are you figuring out exciting ways for people to understand that you know, your message, right? The proven science of climate change. And that would be a critical way to focus. I love your question. Preaching the converted is not worth your time. But just reminding, a lot of the tools that we live in right now are pushing you to preach the converted. They're keeping you away from folks who disagree with you. But go find who they are and try to have the conversations. Now, my uncle Chip, the one I mentioned before, Charles Fletcher, University of Hawaii, his argument on how to get the word out is, his words are, don't be preachy. Try to make the science as simple as possible. Make your points very simple. Use graphics. And speak, and this is his analogy, speak to your audience as if you're delivering a cancer diagnosis. Very grave, very real. there's nothing, look, at the end, it's really worth understanding that there's nothing we can do today to stop sea level rise. It's going to continue for many centuries. Like, sorry, bad fucking news, but there it is, right? There's nothing we can do to stop sea level rise. It's going to continue for centuries. We all know that. You now have to figure out, and you actually have the privilege of just dealing with an island, right? How are you going to preserve that island? And that's what you need to focus on. And how do you get that message across without being preachy and deliver the news like you're delivering a cancer diagnosis, as Dr. Fletcher would suggest. He believes that, and he's been an extraordinarily good communicator. If you can find it, look for a video called, so his name is Charles Fletcher, University of Hawaii. And he did a video called Death of an Island. It's like 8 minutes long. And it's about a little island off of Hawaii that's now gone because of sea level rise. It's 8 minutes. It's evocative. You know, it's a pile of sand, right? But at the end of it, you've got tears in your eyes. So how did he do that? Now, you look at that Death of an Island video and extrapolate to your island. You know, you're next. You're in the crosshairs. So that could be part of the message you bring forward.
Yes, Graham, please go ahead with a question, and then Gary will come to you.
Mary, how do the stories that we tell, should they be different when we are talking to children? I'm on the education subcommittee, and so one of the groups that we're reaching out to probably is the schools, and the gravity perhaps, is that needed with the kids, or how should we change our stories or our tone when we're speaking to different audiences?
I'm not an expert on this question, and it's super important. So I want to make sure that you don't take my words with more gravity than they deserve. But I would offer you, here's my point of view. So remember, again, our train, people getting off the exits. And you've seen this in your own conversations. You can get someone out of your argument really fast. You can kick them out of the tent really fast if you create too fear-laden of an argument. And I'll talk about children in a second. So anybody, if you get too quickly into fear-mongering, whatever word you want to use, they'll see it as fear-mongering. Maybe you're just using the facts. You'll lose them. It's a human bias called the Ostrich Effect. Ostriches don't actually stick their head in the sand. That's not real, but humans do. So if you present somebody like, you know, a really dire scenario, their defense mechanism is to just ignore it. So you have to be careful about that. You'll lose them. They'll get off on the first exit on your train. You've read, I'm sure, Graham, if I'm saying your name properly, I hope. Am I? Okay. You've read about, and I think it's appropriate criticism. There's been a criticism I think is appropriate about educators terrifying children about climate change too early, too young, too viscerally. Now, it will work. You're going to end up with kids who are going to be more activist or more aware, but at a pretty high cost. You know, children are very trusting. I have 3 little boys. They're very trusting of what adults say. They're very trusting people in authority. You walk into that classroom and you give a message. You know, you have a responsibility to the climate, you have a responsibility to their mental health as well. So I suspect that there are probably approved and thoughtful frameworks on how to present this to children without terrifying them. Children have enough terror in their lives as they try to comprehend a world of mortality and risk and betrayal that they're going to get thrown into over time. So now the other problem, if you want to figure out how to get yourself silenced real fast, have some mother say you're screwing with their kids, or a father saying you're screwing with his kids. You'll be out of that classroom, you know, your head's going to spin. So that's another thing you have to be very aware of. Not only will you shut down your ability to message, that's the kind of thing that leads to big backlash. And like, we're not going to have any more of these people come talk to our kids, and all of a sudden you've missed a year or two of being able to teach your very important message. So I think you have to be very delicate.
Can we move to Gary's question? We have about 5 minutes left, RP, so apologize for cutting you off there.
RP was interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. But one idea you mentioned, I think, is a fabulous opportunity if we can figure out how to do it. We'll leave that to Vince to figure out how to do this. And I love your idea about the debt clock that used to be sitting there with the numbers going up. I think it was in Grand Central Terminal somewhere, as I recall. Just think, Vince, if you could come up with a rising tide clock. In other words, I don't know how you can do with the metrics, but just to show that it is moving, you know, the dots keep moving. The dots keep moving and the numbers will increase. In our case, they won't be dollars going up. They'll be tenths or 100ths or 1,000ths. But as long as people see, look, it's happening. Rising tide is happening. And this is happening around, maybe you're just on Nantucket or maybe on the East Coast or wherever. And it would be a living image there if we could figure out a place to put a TV type screen that's always ticking. And every time people walk by, they say, you know what, it is happening. It's happening every day. And look, it continues rising. And even though the amount of rise is 1/10,000,000th of a whatever, it'll at least give people the understanding, the visualization that rising tide is occurring. And every time they go past that screen, they'll start remembering, got to start thinking about that.
Maybe it's square feet of island being lost over time, or inches, or, you know, something. You know, I just thought of that in real time in this conversation, so I haven't thought of it further than that. But that could be, you know, square feet lost, something like that.
Fritz, go ahead.
I'm just going to respond to Gary, and in terms of a graphic, and it's one I've often thought about, and actually might be fairly dramatic, and that's Hammock Pond Road at Cisco Beach. I remember, I mean, I don't know, and Graham, I bet the Department of Public Works has all of the information in terms of how much of that paved road has been lost over the last 50 years. But I can remember being here in the 60s and driving out to the end of Hammock Pond Road and going to the beach. And if you could do a visualization of that road disappearing by every 5 years, I think it could be huge, because there used to be roads that went off of that, houses that went off of that. I mean, in parallel roads going off of that. And I only mention that specifically because it's something everybody can focus on, which is a paved road. And a simple statistic of how many yards of a paved road. Is it a quarter of a mile? You know, what is it that's eroded over a period of time? And is it eroding faster than it was in the 60s? You know, the 60s, the 70s, the 70s to the 80s. Seems to me we probably got all of that data given the coastal charts that have been done, but especially I would think maybe the DPW would know that. But anyway, just a thought.
Thank you, Fritz. So we're coming to the end of our hour with RP. I'll go to Ian in just a second, but I want to make sure we get in a thank you to RP for spending the time with us. It's really something that we appreciate, and you know, hopefully your next trip to Nantucket you will enjoy even more, knowing that we're trying to protect it.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. You know, it's selfless and it's extraordinary, and it's always nice to have, you know, people do better with very big dreams and visions. And I don't know if you've thought about this already, but like, could Nantucket be a model for the world about how you address this? You certainly could have the resources. You could. I know you probably have a lot of resource challenges, but the money's there. You know, could you be a model for other island nations on how to deal with this? Could you be a model of intellectual inclusion and teaching and getting people to come along on this journey with you? This is an extraordinary group you have here together already. And you've got pretty dramatic and beautiful examples probably of what's going to be lost. So thank you for what you're doing. I hope I get to meet you. I hope I'm out there for the Nantucket project next year if it's on, right? I'm sure you all know that thing they do down at the White Elephant with the big white tent. That might be controversial now, and I don't know. I love it. But if I'm there, I think I'd be there next year if they do it. And if I am, I hope I get to meet all of you.
Well, thank you. That would be wonderful. Ian, 30 seconds for a last comment if you have one.
So thank you so much, RP. And your point about the micromedia bubble, what's stopping environmentalists from fighting back with exactly the same bots and trolls that the Russians are using now to influence elections and so on and so forth?
Yeah, okay, so micromedia bubbling is a huge issue. Limbic hijacking is a big issue. Russian, Chinese, neo-Nazi far-right groups, maybe some, this is very, very real. Different conversation, but gird yourself for the next 4 months to be the most divisive, the next 90 days to be the most divisive in your life in America. It's going to be horrible. This election is going to be unbelievably polarizing. This president is going, I know him pretty well. He's going to do everything he can to not leave office. And it's going to be a relatively horrible time for us. And the Russians are going to do, this is real, right? The Russians are going to do all they can to get us pitted against each other, as is MSNBC, as is Fox, as is CNN, right? They want us to believe we're at war. They want us to believe we're at battle. They want us to believe that, if we don't tune in, that we're not going to be part of the fight. But that's not what's actually happening. And that's not actually what's going on in America. We're going to have to be very concerned about this president. But other than that, the center will hold.
Oh, I don't know if anybody else is hearing alarm bells, but it is 12:01, so we are able to adjourn if somebody wants to make that motion. I apologize again, RP, for cutting you off, but thank you once more.
You're strict to the schedule.
Yeah.
The punchline is you can't do it because it's against the law.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. All those in favor, it has to be a roll call vote. Gary?
Aye.
Sarah? Sarah, you're on mute? Yeah.
Sorry, I.
Peter?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Ian?
Aye, and thank you, RP, again. Very stimulating.
I hope you enjoyed it. I love being with you. Thank you.
Jen?
Aye, and also thank you very much, RP.
Fritz?
Aye, thank you.
And chair votes aye. Thank you very much, RP. We'll see you on the next Nantucket project, whenever that may be.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Make sure all you're doing.
It comes to a meeting. So whether you actually physically have that button notification in your hand, it goes in the paper for 2 weeks before it comes to the meeting. It's on the website.
Well, that was excellent. I'm just going to stop this recording now.
There's plenty of avenues for you to follow.